Hey everyone, it is Tuesday night. I leave tomorrow for Atlanta for Pro Tour of the Gatewatch. This has been a little bit different than a lot of my preparation for previous events. I've pretty much just been home playing primarily on Magic Online and communicating information just over Facebook group with the team that I'm working with for this event. Which is the same group that I did work with for the past few events, which I believe now is being called Team Blitz. It is myself, Jerry Thompson, Brad Nelson, Seth Manfield, Ross Merriam, Michael Majors, Chris Fennell. I think that might be everyone. Oh, no. And Steve Rubin. Steve Rubin is, yes, I think he's the last person. Anyway. And Brian Braun I was literally just messaging Brian Braun moments ago. Anyway. The format is modern, so the idea basically was that there's a lot of decks in Modern that have been very well explored, so it's not necessarily quite as important as for, say, a standard event to get together and sort of have everyone test quite as much in person. And also, I really wasn't able to travel out there prior to, maybe early this week. But I decided that since most of the team was just staying in Roanoke and testing amongst themselves there, that it didn't make sense for me to fly out like on Monday to go to Roanoke and then drive out with them to Atlanta on Wednesday. Instead, just stayed home and did my playtesting online. Also, I was watching Shiro while Natalie was at a bachelorette party this weekend, so I couldn't really leave much earlier than that. Anyway, Modern is just a big format, so it's impossible, just totally impossible to cover everything. I've played quite a bit of a lot of different things, though. I played a lot of Black-White Aether Vial, including Black-White Aether Vial with Eldrazi. The Aether Vial deck can play a lot of Colorless Land, which led me to try out Thought-Knot Seer and Wasteland Strangler and Matter Reshaper in that deck. And I found ultimately that the colorless sources and the need for the colorless sources ended up being a pretty big strain. The Wasteland Strangler, Flicker Wisp, Tide Hollow Scholar interaction, all that was pretty cute. And in some matchups was quite powerful, but ultimately a lot of the cards in that deck just aren't that strong independently, which leads to the deck being quite weak in certain matchups. It's very vulnerable to cards like Kolaghan's Command, because you're an Aether Vial deck with a lot of small creatures, so that ended up being pretty punishing. And while I tested that deck probably the most, ultimately ended up getting off of it over the weekend. I tested, unsurprisingly, a reasonable amount of Zoo. I don't really think that a Naya Zoo list, at least the style that I've typically played with like Knight of the Reliquary, Tarmogoyf, bigger version, is really where you want to be for this tournament. There's a lot of people playing Relic of Progenitus, whether they're playing Tron or playing Eldrazi decks, and having a lot of your largest threats neutralized or largely neutralized by a cantrip artifact that's in a lot of decks is not really where you want to be, I think. There's also likely to be quite a bit of burn. I imagine the most popular decks will be Affinity, Burn, and some form of green-black, whether Jund or Abzan. Likely Jund. I think it's the more popular version now since the printing of Kolaghan's Command compared to Abzan. One of the decks that I am considering playing still is actually just Green-White Will-Leaf Liege. I've had a pretty significant amount of success with it online. The deck is quite strong against Burn and against Infect and against Abzan. It's less good against Jund than it is against Abzan, but it's still pretty strong in that matchup just because so many of your cards exchange so well with what they're doing. You're worse against Jund because Lightning Bolt is much better against you in terms of just giving them a way to kill your early mana creatures and pressure you with something like a Tarmogoyf, whereas Abzan decks typically have less cheap removal that allows them to exchange with your resources early on and keep pressure on you. You play a much better attrition game than either deck with Lingering Souls in a lot of cases, particularly in combination with Gavney Township, and obviously Wiltleaf Liege, Finks, Smiter. These are all really powerful cards against decks that are using discard and Liliana. But one of the decks that I've been working on more, and in fact I was just corresponding with Brian Braun about, is Mono Black Eldrazi. I really like specifically Reality Smasher and Thought-Knot Seer. I think they're very, very powerful cards. And in particular, obviously playing with Eldrazi Temple and with Eye of Ugin, being able to play them as early as turn 2 is really strong. I didn't like a lot of the ramp versions, but we have a version that has Eldrazi Mimic in it that's actually pretty aggressive. The deck is still kind of in a questionable spot in my mind right now, but I do think that it has a lot of strong things going for it. As to whether I think that I'll be comfortable with the state it's in by tomorrow, considering I'm about to go to bed and I fly pretty much all day tomorrow, that's not clear. So I would say at this point, the most likely thing that I will end up doing is probably playing the green-white Leaf Leech deck, if only because I feel I'm very comfortable with a lot of the decision-making with the deck in terms of the kind of cards that I'm looking for in different matchups. With the Black Belt Eldrazi deck, like literally just 20 minutes ago, I was saying that I wasn't sure we even wanted like any of the process or exile type stuff in the deck, because I kept being disappointed every time I drew Wasteland Strangler, because the deck only has Relic to actually exile. Strangler was a lot stronger in the black-white version that I was playing, that had Flicker Wisp, Tidehollow Sculler Path. It's just a very different deck in the first place. But this really only had Relic to actually exile opposing cards, which made Wasteland Strangler not very powerful most of the time. It was pretty consistently poor. I felt like I wanted both more potential threats, as well as more potential interaction or card advantage tools. I mentioned Night's Whisper. Brian actually suggested and it was trying Endless One, which is interesting because in a deck with Eldrazi Temple and Eye of Ugin, it can be everything from like Isamaru on turn 1 to like a giant monster in the mid game, which is pretty cool. And it also works particularly well with Eldrazi Mimic. You could play turn 1 Eldrazi Mimic off of Eye of Ugin, turn 2 Eldrazi Temple, play Endless One for 4, attack your opponent for 8. Next turn, play Reality Smash and just kill them. That's pretty good. That's killing your opponent turn 3, which is something that's possible, not entirely likely, but possible, and that's powerful. The deck also gets to play a bunch of Disruption because it's black. It gets to play Inquisition, Thoughtseize, things like that. So I'm, that's definitely a possibility. And it's the deck other than just green decks, green white specifically, Leaf Leech, that I think I'm most likely to play, just because it is doing something very powerful, very proactive, and has a lot of disruptive tools. I don't like the ramp Eldrazi style decks that just go really big. This one actually, like the biggest thing in it is a couple of Oblivion Sowers, just because they're very powerful. Stuff like the Blight Herders I actually don't like, for the same reason I didn't really like Wasteland Strangler. I think that there's not really all that many ways to exile stuff from your opponent's graveyard consistently enough to actually merit playing the card. And the card isn't even that powerful when you do it, other than in those situations where you're using the Eldrazi spawn to ramp into something even bigger. So what I think is powerful about the deck is that it gets to leverage effectively these Ancient Tombs, these 2 mana lands, and using those to play aggressively and beat your opponent while they are still playing a normal game of Magic, I think is much more powerful than trying to like get to this point where you're doing really big things. Because if you're doing this powerful thing fast, like this less powerful thing, but still powerful thing very quickly, you give your opponent much less time to actually leverage cards they might have against you. Things like Fulminator Mage, things like Crumble to Dust or whatever else. Those are cards that are very powerful against like the ramp versions that play much like Tron. In which case, it feels like you kind of might as well be playing Tron. But I think the Thought-Knot Seer Reality Smasher version plays in a much more just aggro rock style of way with discarded and just undercosted or effectively resource cheated creatures. So anyway, that is where things stand right now. I will obviously have to figure out what exactly I'm playing before the tournament starts in a couple of days. I'll let you know as my thought process continues, and see you then. Hello everyone, it is now Thursday night, right before the Pro Tour. I am in my hotel room here in Atlanta, and this is it. I am about to register my deck, just finished leaving it up, and this has been a weird tournament to test for because just Modern in general. Well, my testing process was very different than usual. Rather than sort of, as I mentioned in the previous segment, getting together with a big group in person, I pretty much tested entirely online, and didn't really, have this sort of face-to-face, playing a ton of games of any given matchup. All of my testing was really just like playing in Magic Online queues and leagues and things. So it was a little less rigorous than many of the previous sort of testing sessions or testing sequences or whatever have been. I feel okay going into the tournament. Amusingly, I actually ultimately decided to play basically the exact same deck I played at the last Modern Pro Tour, and that is a green, white, black Lingering Souls Willleaf Liege deck. And my deck is literally like 2 cards different in the main deck, at least, from the deck that I played last time. And the reason that I decided to play it is that I felt like it's a very strong deck in any kind of fair matchup against decks like Abzan or Jund. It's excellent there because you have lots of strong attrition tools, like Lingering Souls in particular, Voice of Resurgence, things like that. It's also strong against Burn, which I expect to be a popular deck at this tournament. And it's good against Infect, and I think reasonable against Affinity, all of which I expect to be fairly popular decks. It's not good against like big mana decks. It's poor against stuff like Scapeshift, Tron, most likely many of the Eldrazi decks if they do show up. It actually was previously somewhat weak to Splinter Twin. It was probably a slight underdog there, but Splinter Twin is gone. It was a huge underdog to the Amulet deck as well, and that deck is no longer legal as well. But it's just a deck that I felt comfortable playing. I played it the last Pro Tour. I must at least have some level of competence with it, and I think that it is a solid deck that can win in most matchups because it is fundamentally just a proactive deck that is able to put a lot of pressure on opponents, has good disruption with Thoughtseize, good removal, things like Path. But just generally, I think it's a overall strong deck. So I'm feeling pretty good going into tomorrow. I do think it's hilarious that my deck is just the same deck I played at the last Modern Pro Tour though. My other real considerations, as I mentioned last time, the Eldrazi deck kind of fell apart. None of us were able to sort of find a version we were particularly happy with. I think there might be something there, but we didn't find it. We didn't, like I said, we didn't have a particularly rigorous sort of testing regimen, so it's entirely possible for things like that to slip through the cracks when people are largely, just doing their own thing and reporting back to one another, which is kind of how this went. A lot of people are playing a lot of different decks. There's people playing Infect, there's people playing Kiki Chord, there's people playing like Aggro Zoo, like Bushwhacker Zoo, and all those decks seem pretty good. I think that Modern, in many ways, is a format that rewards deck knowledge and rewards familiarity with decks. In some cases, more than really sort of deck building, because the format's just so big that it's going to be very difficult for you to legitimately find a deck that is going to have a huge advantage over the rest of the field. And even if you do, the chances to actually play against the field that you expect is not necessarily all that high. So. But yeah, anyway, feeling pretty good. It's going to be an amusing tournament, at least, to just run it back. And I'll let you know how it goes as it goes. So, see you then. So we just finished the first draft. My deck is okay, but not great. I think that my my draft got a little screwed up because I have a lot more success in practice drafting white-black, and I ended up, I think, sort of moving in that direction a little more strongly than I should have based on the signals that I was getting. I think I would have had a much stronger deck if I had ended up abandoning the black cards that I had taken and probably going red. I actually ended up with a lot of red cards in pack 1, but ended up sticking with black after getting a couple of black cards in pack 2, and then opening a Wasteland Strangler in pack 3. It actually was white, black, red in pack 1, almost equal amounts of all of them, and then was pretty solidly white in pack 2, and actually probably could have even abandoned both white and black. I think my deck would have been best if it actually ended up blue-red based on the seat that I was in and what I was seeing really late, especially in pack 3. But, you know, it is what it is, and I think my deck is solid but not spectacular, and we'll see how we do.
All right, well, it is the end of day 1, and it was a bit of a roller coaster of a day. That draft did not go very well. Ended up losing a couple of very close matches, and then getting run over by Martin Yuza. To end up 0-3 in the draft. So that's not a good start to any tournament. I then actually even lost my next round to a Merfolk deck to start the tournament 0-4. So, yeah, it was a brutal start. I actually, there was one point when I was thinking, you know, my very first game of the Pro Tour, my opponent played Kozilek against me in draft on turn 7. And I was like, well, all right, this is a great way to start things off. And throughout the first 4 rounds, it was all, you know, it didn't get better. But then I managed to sort of buckle down in the last 4 rounds of Modern and win them all. So that was nice. I actually ran into, after the Merfolk deck, I ran into 2 Jund decks, a green-black Eldrazi deck, and a Mardu deck, all of which, you know, ended up being pretty reasonable matchups for my deck. It felt like, you know, Jund and, you know, Mardu type decks, basically removal mid-range type decks, are really the best matchups for Lingering Souls decks. That's really what my deck was built to do, is beat those sort of other mid-range decks, the black-green style decks. So I ended up getting probably a little bit fortunate in my pairings there to run into so many of those decks in those key rounds. But it does mean I'll get to come back and play tomorrow, which is nice. It's, you know, there was a point when I was 0-4, I was thinking, you know, oh, well, I went, my worst ever Pro Tour performance was Dublin, where I went 1-5. And, you know, here I was just like, I'm actually just going to be out of it after 5 rounds. But, you know, it was nice to be able to actually have that comeback and get a chance to sort of, you know, do better tomorrow. So I like my standard deck, or modern deck, not standard deck. My modern deck, it is just the deck I played last year, and I think it's just good in the field. You know, there's lots of burn decks and infect affinity, you know, like green-black style decks. So, you know, I'm feeling, you know, pretty good. I do think that I've seen some decks that I'd probably rather be playing. I think the Eldrazi deck with Chalice of the Void just seems super busted. The fact that that you get to, you know, play all these like 2-mana lands and stuff, and then actually have the additional ramp, you know, with the Spirit Guide, and then not ramp but acceleration, and then Chalice is just a super powerful card. If I had thought of playing Chalice in Eldrazi, there's a very good chance I would have played Eldrazi, but it just never, you know, ended up being something that I was really thinking about, which is weird, because I actually had Chalice in the sideboard of my Abzan, my, you know, Wiltleaf Abzan deck at the last Pro Tour, and was considering sideboarding again for this tournament. But I think at that point my brain had already moved into the mode of what am I going to play in my sideboard for this deck, as opposed to even considering the possibility of playing something else. But, you know, overall the tournament has been fun. I'm looking forward to playing tomorrow. I actually got to do it was pretty fun. I got to do a 20-year Pro Tour anniversary deck tech on my Pro Tour 1 deck, where I got 30th place in the junior division 20 years ago. So it was funny, getting to do that on the stream and talking about, you know, the choices that I made then and the advances in deck technology that have come about since. But anyway, I'm gonna go, you know, have dinner and then get to bed and get ready to battle tomorrow. So I will check back with you all when I have more to share with you about Pro Tour of the Gatewatch.
Seeing a really sweet blue-black deck. I'm actually the one with Kozilek this time, along with his Channeler and Double Titan's Presence, also cool stuff. So I got high hopes. Hopefully this will go pretty well, and we will make the best of our 4-4 start. So anyway, let's do it.
actually Sunday morning. The Pro Tour Top 8's actually already underway. Last night after the tournament, I just went out to dinner and didn't really come back and do my little video log. So things are still the same, It's still, the memories are fresh in my mind of getting kind of pummeled on day 2. I did manage to squeak into day 2 at 4-4, but did not really get much further than that. I ended up dropping from the tournament at 5-8. So pretty unimpressive record there overall. I went 1-2 in the second draft. I think my second draft deck was actually pretty strong. Unlike the first draft, where I think the draft really went wrong. In the second draft, I think that things just kind of didn't go my way in the games themselves. I lost a couple of really close games. Same thing in the first draft, really. I guess that a lot of the games were winnable, but I think my second draft deck was much better, particularly relatively speaking. I think that I lost to one deck that was I think probably worse than mine, and I did lose to one deck that was probably better. So I would have maybe expected to go 2-1 with the second deck, and ended up going 1-2. But that kind of happens sometimes. It's Magic, And then in Modern, I ended up not actually winning any matches on day 2. I lost to an Infect deck in a super close match where I actually just basically didn't draw any interactive cards in the 2 games that I lost. And my opponent was actually at 1 life in game 3. I had 4 Spirits and a Wiltleaf Legion play, just attacking down to 1, and he had just drawn and played a Blighted Agent, and then drew and played, literally knocked on his deck, drew, and become immense to me for exactly enough poison to kill me. So then I lost to Kenji Samura, who's playing a Goryo's Vengeance combo deck, which is a really bad matchup for my deck just in general. But sort of looking back at the tournament, obviously my draft record was pretty terrible. I went 1-5, which is actually draft record I had at the Pro Tour in Brussels as well. Historically, I've tended to perform much better in Constructed because I enjoy Constructed a lot more and tend to focus my preparation on that. But I think that if I do really want to improve my Pro Tour performances, obviously the place I need to focus on is just doing better in the limited portion, because it has been my downfall in a lot of events, both in terms of events that I end up kind of bombing out of, like this one, as well as events where if my draft record was a bit better, maybe I would make top 8. So that's kind of how things are. That's kind of how things have been for a while, frankly. I'm sure those of you who have listened to my video logs from a lot of events kind of recognize the common refrain of, well, if only I did better in draft. Realistically, my focus isn't really on Magic these days, and I don't really play nearly as much Magic as I once did. My preparation for this event was playing on Magic Online for a few days, basically, compared to say like the last Pro Tour I won, which was the Pro Tour in Honolulu in 2012. We were testing for like a week and a half leading up to the event, like in a house with a bunch of us together, doing very little other than playing Magic. That I enjoyed that then, but I don't think I'm really at a place in my life where I'm interested in or willing to devote that kind of time leading up to a tournament to try and improve my chances of doing well. I just don't want to be away from my family for a week and a half to go play Magic. I certainly understand and respect people who do make that decision, because it's a decision that I've made in my past, but not one that I think I'm really looking to do now. But regardless, I could do better with the time that I do have. I'm going to sort of reevaluate, I think, what I'm doing as far as tournament preparation is concerned for the next couple of Pro Tours, because obviously things haven't been working recently, and just see if there is something I can change in my preparation regimen to improve it, other than just spend more time. But as far as the overall tournament itself, not necessarily just my experience of it. I think that the ridiculous dominance of the Eldrazi decks, something that's actually not entirely unexpected. I was talking in my earlier that I thought there was clearly something very powerful going on with the Eldrazi decks, but just couldn't find a version that I liked. The CFB face-to-face Chalice Spirit Guide version seems super powerful, and obviously solves a ton of problems that we had had in our testing for that deck leading up to the event. As far as what if anything should change in Modern moving forward, like what I would play in Modern moving forward, I mean, I think that it's going to be a sort of eternal problem with Modern, is that you're going to have these interactions that come up when you just are printing new cards that are not with regard to Modern. I've said many times, I think that there probably just shouldn't be a Modern Pro Tour, and that Modern should be a format that is more focused in like Grand Prix and that level of event. Because I think it's a fun format. I just don't think it's a format that is particularly good if it has to stand up to the lens of all of the best players in the world focusing on trying to break the format. So I think they could very easily, if they wanted, unban a bunch of stuff if they did that too. Because you can have Birthing Pod and Splinter Twin and Bloodbraid Elf and Ancestral Visions and whatever else legal in the format if you are not focused on it being this shifting thing too for the Pro Tour every year. Because the focus of, we want to make sure that this Pro Tour is different from previous Pro Tours and the format feels new. Obviously with this one, just the existence of the Eldrazi to go with the Temple and Eye of Ugin, obviously made a pretty big difference. But for a lot of them, that's why I have bans every year right before the Pro Tour. But anyway, yeah, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see. Well, you don't even know. It'll be interesting to see how this tournament shakes out. It's either Affinity or Eldrazi wins. But it will be interesting to see if the format can adapt in some way moving forward that doesn't involve bannings or unbannings. But personally, I would love to see the format just pretty much taken off the Pro Tour and shifted to being a format where things like all those cards that were banned can be unbanned, and people can just play the decks they want to play, and we don't have to worry about the importance of sort of shaking things up in the metagame, changing specifically for a big marquee event every year. But anyway, that's going to be it for my video logs for this. I'm heading home tonight. Pretty excited to be home so soon, despite being a little bit bummed that I will miss the post-event festivities. But like I said, I'm an old family man now, and I want to be home. So anyway, that's it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
All right, so I guess I kind of lied. I'm not done. I'm not totally done. I did want to just comment a little bit because I've had a lot of people ask me. I'm going to talk about this more at length in my content coming up for Star City. But I just want to comment a little bit about sort of the results of the Pro Tour. It's actually now midweek after the Pro Tour. And sort of had some time to process and just think about it a little bit, and seen a lot of the responses from people who are arguing that oh, Modern is broken, yada yada yada. And I think that the notion that something should be like emergency banned because Eldrazi was the most successful deck at the Pro Tour is just incorrect. Emergency bannings are for things like Memory Jar, which completely ruin everything. And I think that the Eldrazi decks from the Pro Tour were extremely powerful, but they weren't the only decks that did well. Yes, they did incredibly well. But I mean, if you look at previous formats, there's lots of decks that have done extremely well, and then people have found solutions for them. LSV actually brought up the example of Elves in Old Extended, which was 6 of the top 8, 7 of the top 8 or something outrageous of the Pro Tour Berlin that LSV won, and then wasn't even the best deck. Come Extended PTQ season, that was the Mono Blue Fairies deck that Nassif played. So I think that it's dangerous for people to just jump to conclusions and demand things be banned based on the results of a single tournament. I do think that of the sort of cards and sort of decks that potentially could at some point warrant a banning, Eldrazi is reminiscent of many of them. I mean, the problem cards in Eldrazi are not cards like Mimic or Thought Not Seer or Smash or whatever. It's land. And there's not much in the way of, oh, my opponent is trying to do powerful things with land, I'm going to hate on that. Yes, there's Blood Moons, yes, there's Spreading Seas. But actually, and this is kind of reminiscent of what I discovered testing versions of Eldrazi myself leading up to the tournament. The best versions of Eldrazi actually, in many cases, are able to, sort of start firing on all cylinders before something like a Spreading Seas or a Blood Moon or whatever can really, have an impact. And the mid-range sort of ramp Eldrazi style decks that were sort of, well-known and popular prior to the Pro Tour were vulnerable to things like Fulminator Mage, Tectonic Edge, but these versions clearly are not, because they're about being just a powerful ramp deck more than anything else. And I think that that's the problem. I'm gonna sneeze. I stopped. I didn't sneeze. Okay. So the problem is really that it's not like you can. What are you gonna play, like colorless hate cards? Those don't exist. There's not. It's not like oh, the best deck is a mono red deck. I'm gonna play Celestial Purge or Life Gain or whatever. It's like, what's good against these decks? It's like, well, what's good against them is sort of disrupting their land, but not really, because you have to do it on turn 1, in order to actually stop them from doing a lot of their best draws. Things like Blood Moon are powerful, but again, not necessarily fast enough to interact with a lot of their best draws. And fundamentally, the existence of Thought Not Seer gives them a lot of disruption. So I do think that there are ways to combat the Eldrazi decks. Specifically, I think one of the best decks against them is likely to be Lantern Control with Ensnaring Bridge. A lot of the versions didn't have any way, if it hit the table, to get rid of it. And I had a lot of success just playing actually like mid-range creatures against them. It sounds weird, but like Lingering Souls and Voice of Resurgence were actually quite good against Eldrazi. I played against a number of Eldrazi decks online when I was testing, and like a lot of them, it's like if they have the Thought Not Seer draws or whatever, they can take some of your stuff, but they're not necessarily actually particularly well poised to deal with a number of large creatures that potentially even outsize their own. Yeah, they can have Dismember, but I mean, amusingly enough, like Knight of the Reliquary, Smiters, and things like that are actually not bad against them. I was actually dissuaded from playing Zoo at the Pro Tour in part because I was afraid of the processor style Eldrazi decks being popular with a bunch of relics and that neutering Knight and Tarmogoyf. But I actually think that those decks may have some appeal in a world full of decks like Infect and Affinity and Eldrazi, because, well, Bolts and Paths and, like mid-sized dudes are actually quite good in those matchups, amusingly enough. So, I mean, but I think there's a larger point is that Modern is kind of in this weird place as a format, because fundamentally it's important for a format like Modern to exist, because it's important for people to feel like the cards they have are useful and valuable once they're no longer able to be used in Standard. The notion that your cards are only good for 2 years, 18 months, whatever it is now, is something that can definitely dissuade people from wanting to buy Magic cards. One of the reasons that people justify spending a bunch of money on Magic cards is because they can theoretically have them as sort of an investment, either to resell or to use down the line, to continue to play with. But if that goes away, if there is not a place for them to play those cards, it's a problem. But Modern is kind of trying to be that. It's kind of trying to be this place where people, you really liked your Affinity deck, you really liked your Goblin deck, whatever it is, you can play it in Modern. It might not be the best deck, but you can play it. Your Splinter Twin deck, your Birthing Pod deck. Well, that's the problem. The Splinter Twins and Birthing Pods of the world is that if your deck is too good, sorry, you can't play anymore. And a lot of that comes from not necessarily just issues of game balance, but issues of, as so many people quoted in Twitch chat, the goal of competitive diversity. Specifically, there's an incentive given the Modern Pro Tour when Modern is really highlighted once a year currently, to ensure that is a different experience than previous events. And obviously, this particular event was going to be different regardless of whether Splinter Twin got banned, because the Eldrazi in the new set pairing with the old Eldrazi lands were incredibly powerful. And I don't think that's a mistake on Wizards' part. I see a bunch of people saying, oh, this is this huge developmental mistake. Wizards screwed up. No, they didn't screw up. They would have screwed up if they had, they printed those Eldrazi lands at the same time as the new Eldrazi creatures in Standard, because that's what they're aiming for. Obviously, if Modern has things, new cards impact it, that's not a mistake. That's, in many cases, a good thing, because otherwise Modern would just stay the same all the time, and that's boring. So it's important that Modern has new cards that can shake it up, but it also is important that it feels like a place where you can play your favorite decks. And the existence of the Modern Pro Tour has really imperiled that. That we see, people who build their Splinter Twin deck that they love, people who build their Birthing Point deck that they love, suddenly they can't play them because those decks were very powerful and popular, and we're pushing other things out of the format. And that's at its most important because of the highlight of the Pro Tour each year. It's not a coincidence that banned list changes come out right before the Modern Pro Tour in the spring, or in the winter, whenever this is. I live in Southern California. It's never really the winter. But it's important that that the Modern Pro Tour is fresh and different. That it's not just Splinter Twin versus Affinity versus Birthing Pod every single year, and that's because that would be lame. But in like lower sort of profile events, in like Grand Prix or in World Magic Cup qualifiers or whatever else, it's a place for Modern to exist and to thrive, that it doesn't necessarily have nearly the same harsh light of focus turned on it that the Pro Tour does. So I actually think that the best solution, and I've said this sort of thing for a while, is that Wizards could get rid of the Modern Pro Tour and unban a bunch of stuff. Like I made a comment on Twitter this past weekend that I thought it was hilarious that that Bloodbraid Elf is banned. When you look at what's happening in the Modern Pro Tour, people are playing 20 mana versus spells on by turn 3, and they're not even playing like a ritual, and Bloodbraid Elf's a problem. And I think that would let more people play more of the decks that they've grown to like over the years, and you wouldn't have the threat of the Modern Pro Tour being homogenous over and over. And yes, maybe local Modern events would not be as wouldn't be shaken up as much, but that's not what people want. So many people want from Modern is that they have their Modern deck and they can play that in Modern. And there's other people who will be trying to get on top of the latest tech and everything, but so much of the role fundamentally of Modern is to play that part of a place where you can play your cards once they're gone from Standard, and that's being upset by the existence of the Modern Pro Tour and this goal to shake it up every single year. So that's my thoughts. I don't think there's any needs for any sort of emergency ban. I think that we would be better suited to unban a number of things and just kind of see where things go, and do that while taking a step back and play removing Modern from the Pro Tour entirely for now. I think that when Modern was originally announced, or when the Pro Tour schedule was originally announced with no Modern, it was when Standard was not nearly as robust as it has been in the near past, and also sort of at before the new Standard announcement had been made in terms of rotation happening more frequently. So this notion that you'd have just a bunch of tournaments every year that would be Mono Black Devotion, Mono Blue Devotion, and Sphinx of Revelation decks. And given that we know that's not going to be the case now, I think that a lot of people would be much more amenable to removing the Modern Pro Tour, especially now that they know the costs that are associated with it, which is you can't play Birthing Pod, you can't play Splinter Twin. So anyway, this was a little longer and more rambling than I might have initially anticipated, but I wanted to include this as part of my video log because so many people have asked me about it, and there you go. So anyway, that's actually it, and I'll see you next time.